My name is Nikolov, and what I'm going to share with you today will validate a lot of your thoughts and beliefs, especially the ones that are serving you and are useful for you today. And with all luck, I hope to share something that will invalidate a lot of your thoughts and beliefs that are not serving you and keeping you in prison. What I'm going to talk about today is science and the importance of science and the scientific method in literally living a good life, making your goals happen, your dreams, aspirations, what you want to create, but also at the highest level, living a life of fulfillment, happiness, meaning, and purpose. And all of this will come into place to some degree today. But before I continue, I want to preface everything I'm going to say today. And from now on, today and in any of the future trainings with the following. First, please know that I'm not sharing and teaching from the perspective of I've figured out life. I have not figured out life. I am still figuring out life. I have a lot of questions myself. I have challenges pretty much daily. So I'm still figuring life out as I go. My intention is to share what I found useful so far and what has been serving me and what's serving me right now. The second thing I want to share with you is do not take anything I say today at face value. I do not speak the truth. I will not speak the truth today. I can never speak the truth, and I will never make the claim that I'm telling you the truth. This is impossible, and you'll see why in just a few minutes. But just know that I'm asking you to not take anything I say today at face value. Apply your perceptive filters and decide what you want to keep and what you want to discard. And that's that. But again, I will never speak the truth. I cannot speak the truth. I'm simply sharing with you my knowledge and my experience. And I hope that whatever I share serves you, and whatever doesn't serve you, just disregard and cancel. So with that being said, you've probably felt confused quite a bit from all the information that's coming at you all the time. And we live in times where there is access to more information than ever before, and the speeds with which we access information are the highest than ever before. So we're exposed to so much information. But the problem is a lot of this information comes from reputable sources, from sources that we want to trust. And that's even adding more to the confusion, because we don't know who and what to trust anymore. And so I know how this feels. I've felt that way thousands of times before. And I believe this is even more common to people like you and me who are on a very fast and steep growth trajectory, for the simple reason that we want to discover more about how life works a lot faster. And so we expose ourselves to a lot more information a lot faster. Because of that, we add to the confusion even more. But what I found is that there is a way to discern and to make a decision as to what's useful to think and believe, and park the rest for later or even discard it. The good part about that is that nobody can tell you what to believe in and what you think, and you don't have to prove to anybody what you've decided to think and believe. Most people today swear by science, and I was one of these people. And please don't get me wrong, I am strongly informed by science. Science is the foundation of what I think and know. But knowing what I know today, I also know that science has its limits. And I'm going to share these limits, or at least how I think about them, in this expose today. But keep in mind that just 8 years ago, more or less, I was a hardcore materialist and I was an atheist. Basically, my thinking was, this reality that I'm experiencing, feeling, tasting, seeing, smelling, is the same reality that everybody else experiences. And it's been here forever. It looks exactly the same for everybody else, just like I see it and experience it. It was here before I came. It will be here after I'm gone. And it will be here after everybody's gone. And also, I thought and believed that consciousness is the emerging property of my brain. And once my brain goes offline or I die, everything stops, I stop, and my life stops, and that's it. And nobody could talk to me about spirits and soul and anything spiritual. So I was a hardcore atheist and materialist. So know this and keep that in mind as I'm sharing what I'm going to share with you today. But about around the same time, there appeared one of my early mentors and role models. And I believe that what he shared with us and with me, one of these things that he shared, I believe began catalyzing my departure from being a hardcore materialist and an atheist. And here's what he said. He said, I stopped asking for what's true. Instead, I started asking for what's useful. What he said was this: I stopped asking for what science is telling me it's true, and I started instead asking for what's useful for me to believe. Now, this second part about what's useful for me, for us to believe, is a whole nother topic, and science is emerging to prove that the individual realities that we're experiencing are largely the byproduct of our internal world, which is our beliefs and the expectations that are downstream from these beliefs, these core beliefs. But I'm not even going to go there today, because that's a whole another rabbit hole, and it'll take us very, very deep. I'm going to focus on the first part of what he shared with me. I stopped asking for what's true, because what's true is what most of us believe that science tells us the truth. And so I want to deal with science and the truth today. So here's what I found. And again, keep in mind that I am not sharing the truth with you. I'm just sharing my current perspectives. Take what's useful and discard the rest. But the first point I want to make today with you is this: science isn't the truth. Science is not even objective. Science is subjective to the observer. Science is always evolving, and there could never be a universal truth, or the truth of everything, or a theory of everything. So science will always be evolving and developing, and that never ends, and you'll see why in just a minute. What science gives us is scientific theories, but every scientific theory has its own limit. And if somebody comes and says, this is the truth because that's what science says, what they're basically saying is, I am using a scientific theory, but I don't know the limits yet, or I'm even ignorant that every scientific theory has its own limits. So let's take, as an example, Einstein's theory of relativity. I know it explains a lot of the tangible macro world that we live in, and it just works. It just works. But the point is, even the Einstein's theory of relativity has its own limits. At the upper scale, at the grandest scale, it hits its limits at the very early universe, at the Big Bang. It stops working there. Also at the singularity of black holes, it does not work there. At the smallest, the most minuscule levels, that's the Planck scales, it stops working there as well. So that's Planck space and Planck time, Max Planck, the scientist. Planck space is 10 to the minus 43 meters, and Planck time is 10 to the minus 33 seconds. You don't have to remember this, but just so you know, these are the Planck scales. The Einstein's theory of relativity stops there. The reason why it stops there is because space and time stop there. They literally stop making sense at that point. Now we know from science from 2014, this is science. We know that space-time is not fundamental. It's a useful concept for our macro world. It's a mental construct, but it's not fundamental. It literally stops at the Planck scale. And the reason why the general theory of relativity stops there as well is because it's built inside of space-time. Nothing travels faster than the speed of light, and the speed of light is 300,000 kilometers per second. Kilometers, that's space, second, that's time. But space-time stops at the Planck scale. Therefore, the theory of relativity stops at the Planck scale as well. And what's even more mind-boggling is, at that point, if we try to go even smaller, things start becoming infinitely bigger. We actually open up black holes, and it doesn't make any logical sense. But again, very few things make logical sense to the human physical mind. So we explore that, all of this, what I'm going to share with you today, from that perspective. That brings me to the second point, Gödel's incompleteness theorems. So almost 100 years ago, there was this brilliant mathematician and logician, Kurt Gödel. He put everything the mathematicians and the scientists believed on its head. Basically, what he proved mathematically and logically is that any true system, mathematical and logical system, cannot prove its trueness, and it cannot prove its consistency from inside of the system itself, even if it's true. He proved that if you want to prove the consistency and the trueness of a system, you have to go outside of a system. But you cannot prove the trueness of a true system from inside the system. So that puzzled and completely confused the mathematicians of the time, because they believed nothing and nobody could argue with numbers. Nobody could ever argue with the axioms of mathematics. That's final, period. Well, it turns out that no, it's not final. So every time you want to explain the trueness of a true system, you have to go outside of the system. But then again, you change the system. Now you have to go outside of that system again to explain the new system you just created. And that goes out to infinity. And to use an illustration by the cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman, he uses the example of a computer. If you ask a computer to explain itself, the computer has to build a program to be able to explain itself. And when it builds that program and it's successful at explaining itself, now the job is done. But then now we changed the computer system because we introduced a new program. So the system is still not explaining itself. You have to build a new program on top of this new program to explain this new system. And that goes out infinitum. And so this is a paradox. So Gödel's incompleteness theorems introduced a paradox that never ends. It goes out to infinity. And now you're probably going, but Ivan, this applies only to mathematics and logics. And that's true. But then physics, the science that we use, general physics, to explain our natural world, the macro world we live in, and it explains it very well. That science is entirely based on mathematics. In fact, you could say that physics is mathematics, but then mathematics has its own limitations. And so that now brings me to a different angle I want to take here. I want to talk about the scientific method. What is the scientific method? Basically, we start with a question, and this question is based on assumptions. Based on these assumptions, we build a hypothesis. Then we build experimentation, we make observations and measurements, and then we build a conclusion. That's the scientific method. So assumptions, hypothesis, experimentation, conclusion. That's it. Here is where we run into a challenge. That whole system can never explain its assumptions. They lie outside of the system. In order to explain its assumptions, it has to create new assumptions on top of that. And that continues to infinity as well. It's the same paradox we keep running into over and over and over and over again. And where it gets even spookier and crazier is that the assumptions that we make to create contemporary science, and by the way, this is how science is created. Everything we can call science has to be to conform to the rigors of the scientific method. But everything we use as assumptions to create science today starts within space and time. And so you can already see that we're introducing a lot of questions here. There is a saying in programming, in computer engineering, garbage in, garbage out. So if you put something that's not fundamental because the assumptions that we have are coming from within space-time, then you cannot have anything fundamental coming from the other side. And so that already precludes a theory of everything or universal truth from within space-time. But we all operate from within space-time. That now takes me to the third point. Science accepts what's measured. Again, let's remind what the scientific method is. We start with assumptions, then we build a hypothesis based on these assumptions, then we experiment, and we build a conclusion based on the measurements and the observations of this experimentation. But our assumptions are completely based on space and time. We already saw that. That already introduces a huge question here. But on the other side, to be able to know what happens with the experimentation, we have to measure and we have to observe. What do we measure with? Our measuring apparatus works from inside space and time. Moreover, it uses attributes that are entirely based on space and time. Attributes like length, mass, pressure, temperature, volume. And literally what we're measuring is change. But change requires time because change is an event. You cannot know if anything is changed unless there was time. Entropy. So an event requires a beginning and an end, but you can only have a beginning and an end in temporal time. But we already know that temporal time is a mental construct. Time and space themselves are not fundamental. So you can already see how big the problem becomes here. We have assumptions that are not provable by the system, by the same level of the system themselves that we start with. These assumptions need new assumptions to prove this whole system. But also the assumptions that we make always come from space-time, and space-time is not fundamental. But on the other side of the scientific method, where we measure the experimentation, we also use space and time that's not fundamental. And so you can already see that there is a lot going on here with science. And again, science is absolutely credible and I rely on science, but I am exploring its limits and it has its limits. And I'm exposing these to you here. That brings me to the fourth point, the observer effect. Oh, and by the way, if somebody comes and says, this is what science says and it's final, now you understand that they don't have a good grasp on how science is built and how science works. But also, and this is very interesting, there is now a term for people who swear by science, whose God is science. It's scientificism. And I was thinking earlier, what would be the noun for scientificism? Maybe scientivist? I don't know. It's just fun to think about that. But I used to be a scientivist before. So the fourth point, the observer effect. The observer effect and the measurement problem is pretty much the same thing. The measurement problem is the philosophical development of the observer effect. So where is the observer effect coming from? There is this famous now demonstration by quantum physics called the double slit experiment. And I'm sure you already know about the double slit experiment. More than 100 years ago, quantum physicists created the double slit experiment, and what they observed completely threw them off. And to this day, we do not have an explanation for why things happen that way. So what the double slit experiment demonstrated was that matter and wave have dual properties. So basically, waves and matter has a dualistic property. Light and matter has a dualistic property. And that completely turned on its head the notion of objective reality. What do we call objective reality? So basically, in just very simple terms, when we don't observe or measure something, it behaves exactly as a wave. And a wave is information, pure potentiality, many possibilities all in one place. But when we look at it, or when we measure, when we observe it, and then the wave function collapses into just one of these many possible potential. And so now the question is, which one potential? Why this one and not another one? Which are the other ones? How many potentials? So it already introduces a lot of questions. But the point is that observation creates matter. And for observation, we need an observer. And an observer is an individuated consciousness that's observing. So now we're going back to the scientific method. On the other side, when we're about to analyze the outcomes of the experimentation, we need to measure and we need to observe. The way we see what our measuring apparatus is saying is by observing it. But by the fact of observing it itself, we're already influencing what's being observed, because we are collapsing it from pure potentiality, many possible choices, into just one. And so you can see right here that science can never be objective. Science is subjective, and it's subjective to the observer, because we always need an individuated human consciousness to observe what's being measured and to make conclusions. And so now that raises the question, well, how do you quantify the observer? Well, we don't know how to quantify an observer, because we don't know anything about consciousness. We don't know how to quantify consciousness. We know zero about consciousness. We don't know what that is. But let's pretend for a second that we could quantify consciousness, and we could quantify the observer of this experiment. But now we introduce another level. And so now we have to have a new observer that's observing the second observer, that's observing the first observer, and quantifying that observer. We keep running into the same paradox and the same open loop. And that always goes out to infinity. That is why you can never have a theory of everything. That is why math is always evolving, not math, but science is always evolving. That is why science is subjective. That's why you can never have the universal truth. It's just impossible. That brings me to the last point I want to make today. Science later refuted by newer science. And I'm going to read straight from my notes, because I don't want to introduce any ambiguity here. And I want to just give you the facts. Science used to claim that the Earth is the center of the universe. The geocentric model was championed by Ptolemy in the 2nd century, and we believe that for over 1,400 years. Nicholas Copernicus challenged this in 1543, placing the sun at the center of the solar system. This shift was a major revolution in astronomy. Spontaneous generation. For centuries, people believed that living organisms could arise spontaneously spontaneously from non-living matter. Experiments by Louis Pasteur in the 19th century proved that life only arises from pre-existing life, disproving the theory of spontaneous generation, phlogiston theory. And by the way, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. It might be phlogiston or phlogiston, so don't quote me on this. Phlogiston theory, a 17th century theory, attempted to explain combustion. It proposed that all flammable materials contained a substance called phlogiston, which was released during burning. Antoine Lavoisier's experiments in the late 18th century demonstrated that combustion involves the combination of a substance with oxygen, not the loss of phlogiston. The ether, we often say that thought is available in the ether, or that idea is available in the ether. That's where it's coming from. The ether is the open space, the empty space. We don't even know what empty space is, by the way. But the ether, in the late 19th century, physicists believed that light waves traveled through a medium called luminiferous ether. An experiment in the 1880s, or 1887 to be precise, failed to detect this ether, leading to the development of Einstein's theory of special relativity, which postulates that the speed of light is constant in all inertial frames of reference. All right, that was a mouth. Next, the steady-state universe. This cosmological model, popular in the mid-20th century, keep in mind, this is only 60 years ago, proposed that the universe had always existed and was unchanging. The discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation in 1964 provided strong evidence for the Big Bang theory, which states that the universe began from a hot, dense state and it has been expanding ever since. Now, here are some modern scientific theories that might be challenged in the very near future. The Standard Model of Particle Physics. This model describes the fundamental building blocks of matter and the forces that govern their interactions. That's our natural world today. However, it does not explain phenomena like dark matter and dark energy, and it doesn't incorporate gravity. The theory of general relativity. We already spoke about that. The theory describes gravity as a curvature of space-time. It has been incredibly successful in explaining many phenomena, but it breaks down at the singularity of black holes and at the very early universe. A theory of quantum gravity that unifies general relativity with quantum mechanics could potentially challenge our understanding of gravity. The Big Bang theory. While the Big Bang theory is well supported by observations, there are still some unanswered questions about the early universe, such as the origin of inflation and the nature of dark energy. The theory of evolution. While evolution is all well-established scientific theory, there are still debates about the mechanisms of evolution and the role of chance versus necessity. And finally, the nature of consciousness. This is a huge one, and it's an area of interest to me personally. The nature of consciousness. The scientific understanding of consciousness is still in its infancy. There are many different theories about the nature of consciousness, and future research may lead to a completely new understanding of this phenomenon. So there you have it. I threw quite a bit at you, and I know it was you had to flex your brain and you have to follow me here with what I'm saying, but now you have it. Science can never be final. Science is not objective. It is subjective. There can never be a theory of everything, because that is literally impossible, and nobody can come and tell you that they know the truth, because the truth is also impossible. It's precluded. I cannot tell you that I know the truth. And by the way, I already told you that. Also, keep in mind that everything I shared with you today is based on my research and my interest in physics and quantum physics and metaphysics. But with all my research and all the depth I've gone through, I have to tell you that my understanding of physics and quantum physics and these sciences and science in general is borderline ignorance. So keep that in mind. I'm merely scratching the surface. All I'm doing is researching more and thinking about this so I can ask more powerful questions. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm sharing with you the questions that I am asking, and I'm doing that in the hopes that now you can eliminate quite a bit of the confusion confusion, and that you can decide for yourself and discern for yourself what you choose to call your truth, not the truth, but your truth, and what you choose to reject. And also to have one in mind when somebody comes and says you're wrong in believing that because the truth is somewhere else. Now you know. So this was all I wanted to share with you today. That was a mouthful. If you want more ideas like this, please go to ivannikolov.com. That's where I share my calendar with public events, and that's where you'll find out more about future trainings like this. They'll be mostly free, but even better, join my Elevate community, because that's where I announce everything. And to do that, you can go to ivannikolov.com/elevate, the number 8. So that is ivannikolov.com/ELEVA. So that's it for everything. Thank you for letting me share, and I wish you best of luck and much love. Bye bye.